Hey, Giants fans, this is Chris Franklin from NJ Advanced Media, and welcome to the Talk is Cheap podcast, the show where we discuss all things related to the New York Giants. Now, before we begin, I want to remind you that you can read our content on NJ.com/Giants and make sure to bookmark that to get the latest Giants news and analysis. Well, after waiting for months, the start of the NFL season is upon us, and the Giants are about to begin their season. And to dive into that, there's a news voice to the Talk is Cheap podcast who will be appearing on here every other week and rotating with Daryl Slater, and that is new co-host Ryan Novozinsky. Ryan, how are you doing today?
Chris, I'm great. We got just a couple hours here till NFL football starts. So I guess, life is back to normal. Nature is healing, isn't it?
Yeah. Oh my goodness. It feels nice to see that, like you get the little goosebumps, you've seen everything else. Everybody's in a better mood because football's back. It's good to actually see that is good. And, it's funny because and I'm kind of going into our first question here. And it's almost like going back to your previous life. It's a new podcast combination, almost like a new defensive pairing, a line changer, if you will. Ryan, can you tell us a little bit more about your background and your path to covering the Giants?
No doubt. Yeah. I went to college at Oklahoma State University, obviously, big football minded school. And there I really, I didn't do much coverage for hockey. I did a lot of football coverage. And the reason why that's relevant is because once I graduated and I had an internship at NJ.com during my junior year. But I stepped right in and as general assignment really at first. And then, thought that there was a need to cover the Devils because they just hadn't been covered in so long. And, from there it was, kind of a roll of the dice, kind of a gamble, right? Because you just didn't know how well they were going to do, how popular it was going to be. So then we started covering the Devils full time and the ball kept rolling and rolling. Then it's like, okay, this is having some success here. And then, Devils had their successful season, kind of mirrored our company's, traction with covering the Devils too, and the page views and everything like that. And then, the Devils kind of sucked again the year after that, but our page views stayed up. So it was great. And then, this season, stepping in on the Giants beat, I'm about a week into it and I love it already. It's a good time. I had to cover a kind of a coach hot seat situation last year with the Devils. And I guess I'm stepping right back into it. So I guess to answer your question, Chris, I guess I just like seeing, no, I'm joking. I don't like seeing coaches. It's coincidental and it keeps following me.
It does, right? But I gotta say, you went to the college where one of the best lines that a coach has ever said, "I'm a man, I'm 40."
Of course.
You come from that coach or that 40. So I trust your judgment in terms of that stuff, man.
I feel like, and no disrespect to any of the coaches that I've covered, because it's kind of hard to top Mike Gundy. Progressively, it's gotten more and more. I don't think boring is the right word, but maybe milquetoast is the right word, because it's just like it starts at Gundy, who's like the peak of the peak in terms of quote ability, and every press conference you go to. There was one that we went to where you hear about the "I'm a man, I'm 40," but there's so many others too that, like, I guess locally famous would be the word. There was one where he was drinking a smoothie from Tropical Smoothie after a game. And he very much strongly implied that there was vodka in it. And you could tell that he was a little looser than usual. Like, he's always very loose, but like he was looser than usual. So I don't know for sure, but I think he might have been drinking during this press conference. I don't know that for sure, but he was the peak of the peak.
See, now you got to convince Brian Dable to get like Casamigos or something like that for in his coffee. He'll be good to go. Let me do that. That or his dip, whatever you can do, mix it in. It'll be perfect. It'll be good.
If I could convince him of that, I think there would be a whole hell of a lot less people having him on the hot seat.
Oh, that's true. Well, seriously, welcome aboard, and we're glad to have you along here on the NFL crew with us. Now, we're going to start talk about some more Giant stuff here. I'm going to start out with this. There was and this is a spoiler alert to anybody who's watching the latest installment of Hard Knocks that's following the Chicago Bears. So if you are, please fast forward or mute us, what have you. I don't want to ruin that for you. But Giants GM Joe Schoen was having a discussion with Bears GM Ryan Poles at the Clemson Georgia game, and it sounded like Shane was envious of Poles because he didn't have to discuss the quarterback situation. Now, even if Daniel Jones has an okay season, Ryan, do you think this is his last season that he'll be the starter?
Yeah, I do, but I think I want to touch on the polls and Shane exchange first. I just thought the most fascinating thing about that was, that it's such an open secret when another GM in the league in polls is literally finishing Shane's sentence. I mean, he knew where he was going with that. Obviously, Caleb Williams is going to be so good in this league. At least I think so. But yeah, I mean, to touch on the Jones point, I think that he would need to have just a tremendous season to really, kind of right all of his previous wrongs, and just to instill some confidence. And even then, like I'm talking 30 touchdowns, and he has to make the playoffs, and I think he has to win a playoff game in order for things to really for him to convince. It's not even just John Mara. It's you have to convince this whole fan base. And, Chris, I'm sure you've seen it on Giants game weeks, like just how sometimes this fan base can be so, hectic sometimes. And I guess passionate would be the right word. To right all of those wrongs that he had, obviously in the past, and the injury troubles, and the inconsistencies. And, now that you have such a great offensive weapon in Malik Neighbors, and, Daryl and I were talking about yesterday. I mean, I feel like someone that kind of goes unwritten about a lot. I wrote about him today just because of that, is Andrew Thomas. I mean, you have some of those foundational building blocks on this offense now where, you lost Waller, you lost a couple other guys. You obviously lost Saquon, and some of the foundational pieces of that offense. But now you have that explosive firepower through the air. There's no excuse for Daniel Jones to kind of, to be as mediocre as he's been the past couple seasons this year, when you have a revamped offensive line, which I really like. If we could touch on that later. I mean, this offensive line, I think what they did with it last year being so historically bad, getting that veteran presence and getting pre-built chemistry with, you got Jermaine Illuminor on the right side, you got Greg Van Roten as your right guard. Those two have chemistry, and oh, by the way, they also have chemistry with their new offensive line coach. You get John Michael Schmitz having another year under his belt. You get another veteran in John Runyon. Daniel Jones, on paper, should have the protection this year, at least a whole heck of a lot more protection than they had last year. He also, on paper, has a weapon that even he has not had in previous years in Malik Neighbors. He hasn't even had a weapon in the same stratosphere as him. On paper, this all should click. Now it's up to Jones. The onus is on him to make it click. And quite frankly, I just don't think he has it in him.
And we can talk about now, yeah. When you look at this offensive line, we mentioned all of that. Do you think they'll actually live up, or is this just another year where you say, oh, this is the year where they're protecting them, and then by week 6 and 7 it's like, well, there's holes and they need to draft another offensive lineman?
Yeah, I mean, that's the one thing, because and the problem is this is a position group where Shane has not had success at, right? I mean, you look no further than Evan Neal, look at Azudo. This is you kind of don't want it to be, a position that he has to draft, right? At this point. So I think from here on out, I mean, maybe they go and try to get bigger fish in the off season than a Greg Van Roten, who is very good, and a Illuminor, who is very good. And maybe that kind of a good season, a solid foundational season, is what's going to attract them in the future. And then, if they do cut Daniel Jones at the end of next offseason, and it's a 23 or 32, I can't remember the exact number off the top of my head, cap hit, instead of the crazy cap hit it would have been this offseason, they free up their cap space a little bit. I think that you're gonna see maybe some free agents attracted here on that offensive line, because they didn't get any spring chickens now. John Runyon's getting older, Greg Van Roten's obviously getting older, Illuminor, same thing. Andrew Thomas is that foundational piece, and he's in the most important position, obviously, at left tackle. But maybe he can convince other people, and maybe a strong offensive performance this year, and such a great, talented young wide receiver in Malik Neighbors, and potentially a new quarterback next year in the draft, or if it's Dak Prescott, who knows? Maybe those are the kind of people that can convince even better offensive linemen to come sign with the Giants. And really, because in years it feels like they haven't had a good offensive line. You want to just get that narrative out of the way. And talking to players this week, like in talking to the offensive line this week, that's the one thing that they keep coming back to is we just want this narrative to go away. And you can't blame them, but the onus is on them.
And it's going to be funny. I think it could be March 15th, 2025 could be one of those days that's going to be celebrated like a holiday, because that's when when Daniel Jones is due a $12 million roster guarantee. His base salary is converted to guarantee. So I could see that being one of those things where everybody goes, he's gone. Thank goodness he's gone. Yeah, you hope it's not nothing one of those. So, and for the record, I would love to see Dak Prescott in the New York market, because I think not just for the on the field, I think he would definitely make the Giants offense more, I would say, definitely more potent in a ways that you have a competent quarterback in there. I just want to see those Giants Cowboys games where he goes back to Arlington and what have you. I think that would be great to watch.
Wouldn't that be amazing though? Especially like in this market and in that market. Like, and I'm going to talk about the Dallas local market. I'm talking like, could you imagine how many first take segments it would be? It would be every day. It would be dead of July every day. Dak Prescott. What can he do? And they'll probably want to bench him by July. It's and then the next day praising him, he's going to win MVP. It would be the best thing. I mean, I think all of us, our website would just be, we would get our revenue maybe in just a week just because of that content.
Now you got in my mind. Now you got Steve say, "Oh, look at this Dak Prescott. We know what's going on." Now, thanks very much for having that stuck in my head. I appreciate that. Thanks. In terms of that. Now, this is going to be the first time I get to talk to you since the roster cuts were made for the Giants. Were there any decisions that surprised you?
I think there was maybe a couple. The one that stuck out to me, and it's kind of moot now because they got him back, was Isaiah Hodgins, and that's because it was just. He had some success last year, and I know he's not high on the depth chart, obviously, but that's a veteran wide receiver that they really respect and has familiarity, obviously, with Daboll. And a lot of these youngsters, and you're going to have to at some point. The youth movement's going to take over, and they're going to end up being the vets at some point. For them to cut him and be so loose about it, they must have had, some sort of understanding with other teams, like, hey, don't pick him up, because you go figure, like maybe even Buffalo obviously used to have him too. Like maybe they, go re-pick him up again because they certainly need some wide receiver help right now. So it was kind of a risk to get rid of Hodgins, but obviously they get him back, and I think locker room wise, he's really good. That you just hear that like. From the first day you walk in and you're talking about it with other reporters, like they point out Isaiah Hodgins as being such a big, kind of locker room glue guy for them. So for them to be kind of so loose with that, I guess, that was the one thing that kind of stuck out to me. But other than that, I mean, I guess you could talk about Alex Johnson too. Just any defensive back on this team to be able to cut him with how green the secondary is. You just don't want to see it, I guess, and you scratch your head when you do see it. But obviously they get Adoree Jackson back, and that's I guess going to be the answer to their secondary questions. Even though, as many have reported, they didn't necessarily like his play last year. We'll see, but I guess we're going to see him at the number 2 outside corner spot. So it's definitely going to be a struggle for Shane Bowen and the secondary this year. Thank goodness that they get Brian Burns in the offseason and they just bolster that pass rush, because oh boy, is there going to be a lot of zone coverage and even that. I bet you teams are going to bust through that this year with this secondary bid.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot of it. Shane Bowen's got his task cut out, especially with that schedule that they have. Oof, good luck with that in terms of that. Now, that schedule starts.
Justin Jefferson. Come on.
Yeah. Welcome to the Giants. Yeah, figure out a way to stop Justin Jefferson. Oh, great. Yeah. Now, he may have some help. They maybe get some help in terms of that because you got Sam Darnold on the other side playing at quarterback on that one, too, which – if you've been a Jets fan or you're from the New York area, you know the trials and tribulations, what it was like to be around Sam Darnold and see what he was supposed to be and what wound up happening to him.
It's
hard. Oh my gosh, between him, Sanchez, and everybody else, like it's just It's dumpster fire is a nice word. Anywho, what are some of the matchups you're going to be watching out for in this game?
Yeah, I mean, I think the one that sticks out to me at first is just like we talked about, right? Is Deonte Banks and how he can rise to the occasion and try to stop this beast in Justin Jefferson. And you're right. Listen, Sam Darnold is the one that's throwing passes to him. You could debate whether if JJ McCarthy would have started injured or not here, but this is the cards that they have right now. This is their hand. Even still, if Justin Jefferson, with how quick he is and how much separation that he can create, this is going to be kind of a humbling thing for Deonte Banks. So you need him to kind of rise to the occasion there and prove, hey, this is why I was a cornerback that was drafted in the first round. I'm not going to say he's going to lock up Justin Jefferson every time. He won't. But at least apply pressure there enough to where you can make this final score at least somewhat, respectable. And, I know the spread is what it is now. It's very close and there's good reason for that. But this Minnesota defense, man, I mean, under Brian Flores and the Giants know that so well. They talked about it all week. It's going to be tough. It's going to be a very different defense than they faced in that playoff game where they beat Minnesota 2 years ago, which feels like 10 years ago now. But I think overall, it's how does Deonte Banks lock down Justin Jefferson, and how does this Giants offense? How do they find a way to kind of outmaneuver Brian Flores, who's obviously a strong defensive mind, I think the biggest part of that is the new creativity in Brian Daboll calling plays, right? He's putting his job on the line here in my estimation. I mean, with him taking over play calling, he's done it a couple times in the past, but it was always few and far between. It was never boom, this is Brian Daboll's offense. That's what we saw in Buffalo, but that's not what we saw with the Giants. You look at just some of the notes that I have here, like in researching how predictable the Giants offense was last year. Coming out of shotgun, they threw the ball 64% of the time. Okay. Lining up under center, they ran the ball 65% of the time. So Daboll doesn't really have a set offense. So you can't look at it as, he has a spread. No, he really has a blend, a hodgepodge of a bunch of different things. So, but I think predictability is the one thing that he has to combat. You can't get too conservative now. You got to kind of break the mold and utilize everything in your arsenal there to make this offense pop, right? RPOs, play action. We look at the stats there. When you're running out of shotgun, don't always throw the ball. When you're lining up under center, what are we doing here? Come on, don't always hand it off. So some more creativity there. That's good. That's what's going to stop. That's what's going to combat rather Brian Flores and Brian Daboll is going to have to. The onus is on him again this year. I know I keep saying the onus is on a bunch of these people, but I feel like it's on Daboll, it's on Daniel Jones, and that's really what's and the offensive line to have this good season, and obviously the secondary. But I feel like it's pretty much unfair to put it all on them because of how young they are.
Yeah, it's funny. I think Brian Daboll and Eagles head coach Nick Sirianni went to the same school of thought last season because it was like, first down. It's a shotgun. I bet you it's inside zone or a wide receiver bubble screen.
Yes.
Oh, what do you know? It was a bubble screen or inside zone. It's fun of that. Now, the one matchup I'm really looking at, and I think for this guy, he can have a really big year because of the emergence of Brian Burns and him being on the opposite side now. I want to see what Kayvon Thibodeau does against Brian O'Neill. I think this is a perfect prime spot to show, hey, you know what? I know he's got a lot of question marks around him. I know he had a decent season last year. In my estimation, I thought he had a decent season. But now that you have a bona fide star pass rusher opposite of him, I want to see what he can do and take advantage of that. And when you got to go against this guy O'Neill who gave up 6 sacks last season for the Vikings, he should be feasting. And and this is going to be key for if the Giants have a shot to even want to be in this game, they're going to need to get a pass rush because Darnold's going to throw that ball over at least once or twice. And the best way to do that is by with the defensive line getting that pressure off the edge, getting to make sure you see that Darnold sees ghosts again. It's like, well, I'm back here. Oh, they must want to see me again. What the heck's going on? You want to get that ball out quickly before he wants to, or the strip sacks. Those are going to be the two things I think for Thibodeau. I think that's key for him.
I feel like with Thibodeau too, the Brian Burns trade, it almost takes off pressure for him, but also adds a little bit because it's like, okay, we saw the sacks numbers last year and it was good. It was really good. It was 11 and a half sacks, right? But it's also the PFF numbers kind of leave a lot to be desired there. It kind of shows it wasn't maybe creating as much pressure as he necessarily should have been, and it wasn't necessarily as efficient as it should have been. I'm looking for a big motivated year out of Thibodeau. And like you said, I think this matchup against Minnesota, I think this is such a good starting point for him. I mean, you said it best, man. I mean, him trying to pierce through this offensive line, I think it's a good litmus test for what he could do going forward. And we'll just kind of leave it at that. I mean, him against Brian O'Neill is going to be a fun little matchup.
It will be, and it's going to be something a little different when we're watching this game on Sunday. Saquon Barkley won't be on the field for the Giants, first time since 2018, and it's going to feel a little weird in terms of watching that. Who do you think was going to take the reins as a lead back? And if there won't be a lead back, do you think they go by committee? And if they do go by committee, do you think it was committee or by one person myself? Do you think they'll be able to make up the production that Barkley had this last couple seasons?
In researching this and doing stories on this all summer, it feels like you look at the average yards per carry that Singletary has in his career, that Devin Singletary has in his career. It's better than Saquon Barkley's. Now, I'm not sitting here on a soapbox and saying that it's better than Saquon Barkley. I'm not saying that at all. But it's clear that Joe Shane kind of, in valuing positions, he doesn't necessarily value that. And obviously we saw that with the Josh Jacobs thing last week when, they say Josh Jacobs says, oh yeah, the Giants offer me this. And it's like, wait, what? Okay. Does Joe Shane value running backs now? I guess, but then it ended up not being true. So Devin Singletary will be the number one back, right? I think that's how they'll start. They'll try to start it as him, kind of getting the bulk of the workload there, just because of the familiarity with Daboll. And if you'll note too, like the two quarterbacks that Singletary's kind of been in an offense with now, or in his career so far, the two backfields he's been a part of is Josh Allen and CJ Stroud last year. So, those offenses are obviously leaning heavily on those quarterbacks, right? So I think with Daniel Jones, you obviously we talk about neighbors and they're trying to open some semblance of pass attack, and Jones also has that running ability, so they'll try to open it up. But if he's mediocre again this year, which very well could be, I think they're going to be leaning on Singletary a lot more. So I think to start, you'll see him get a majority of the reps there. I really like Tyrone Tracy, the rookie out of Purdue, too. And I think once he shows what he can do, as not just a third down back, but as kind of your receiving back too. Because remember, this is a kid that for 5 years in college, he went to University of Iowa for 5 years. Then in his 6th year, he transfers to Purdue, or I think in his 4th year, he transfers to Purdue. And by his 6th year, they said, okay, it's not working as a wide receiver. Time to switch positions. This is a big risk, but you got to take it. So this is a kid who not only did he not realize he was going to be in the NFL this time last year, he didn't really know what position he was this time last year. So converts from wide receiver to running back, does a great job with Purdue, then gets drafted by the Giants. And I think he's done really well, and he did really well in camp. They're really impressed by his athleticism, and I think his just the cerebral way of his game too. He knows how to read a defense, and we even talked about this the other day. I talked about this with him. He knows how to read a defense. He knows how to identify, hey, is it zone? Is it man? Whatever. Are they blitzing? And a lot of times these running backs, they're not necessarily taught that growing up. So it's not ingrained in them. With this kid, it's ingrained in him. So again, I think it'll start out with pretty heavy run game with Singletary. But as weeks go on, as he proved himself more and more, I think Tyrone Tracy, the rookie, I think they're going to kind of, maybe by committee it a little bit. And then you have Eric Gray too, who's also, an athletic kid, who's young, 24 years old. And he's obviously proven his athleticism in the past. He could be a weapon too in the pass game. I'm really interested to see if they can match that Barkley productivity. I don't know. I mean, maybe we don't look at the 2024 metrics, right? Because I think that the Eagles are going to lean on Barkley a whole heck of a lot. So maybe we don't compare them necessarily apples to apples, but it kind of is an apples to orange situation, right? I think they can, if they do a by committee approach. I think they're talented enough and they have enough weapons now on the offensive line that they can, mimic at least some of that productivity.
Very, very nice. Very nice. Now, one thing I like to do on these podcasts, I like to play games. So we're going to play a little game right here. It's a basic one, over or under. And I'm going to ask you a couple of questions and make a couple of statements. And I want to know, tell me if it's going to be an over or under and the reasoning why. Now, I'll start with this first one. Excuse me. Wide receiver Malik Nabers. He's placed in the voting for the Offensive Rookie Player of the Year, 2.5. Do you think he's going to be one of the top 2 players, or do you think he's going to be over and further down the list?
Okay, so under in this scenario is good, right? just to clarify.
Yeah. Yep. Under's definitely good.
So I am going under. I mean, it's him and I guess it's Caleb, right? That's the coin toss here. I wrestle with it time and time again, but Nabers is a freak, man. He's gonna be so good. Like you see it in practice. I mean, he was kind of like a man amongst boys this summer, if you will. Like, and it's so ironic because he's 21 years old. So for this kid to do that, and there's going to be a lot of pressure on him now. I mean, you're going to see teams, try to put as much pressure on him as possible because, quite frankly, he's really their only weapon in the pass game, only legitimate, terrifying weapon, I should say. I think he's going to be somebody that rises to that kind of challenge, though. He doesn't seem to shy away from any adversity. I mean, listen, this is a kid that. You just look at it from this perspective already. They unretired a number for him. So for him to not only relish that and want that, I don't think that he's a shy guy by any means at all. I think that a strong cornerback that goes against him, or any sort of scheme that they try to throw at, and they're going to get all these defense coordinators are going to try to game plan against Nabers. I think he's going to try to rise to that, and he might get edged out by Caleb Williams, and that's because I kind of think that the Bears are going to make the playoffs just because they're so talented, and I think by default he might win that award. But man, he's definitely going to be the under there.
See, I question, like I keep going, like I can see him being in the top 2. Then I look at Jaden Daniels for the Commanders, and I think they can. See, I flip flop. Like I can see Jaden Daniels having a better season than Caleb Williams. I know it's sacrilegious the way Caleb Williams have played this preseason. I don't know what it's about. I just think that Cliff Kingsbury is just going to get him in good positions where I can see it being Daniels 1, maybe Nabers 2. And then maybe Williams 3, but we all know the affinity for the quarterbacks. Oh, we got to make sure that they get everything no matter what award. Oh, we got to put them front and center. So it's like, oh, great. But I do think Nabers is going to have a really good season. He'll be the outlet and the impetus for this offense coming up. So
100%.
Next one, combined sack total for Brian Burns and Kayvon Thibodeau, over under 23.5.
I saw this one and I was like, oh man, like I'm going over. I got to slam the over. How crucial this is for this Giants defense. I mean, we talk about it. This offensive line, this defensive front, this pass rush for the Giants, I should say. They are so important for this team. The reason that Joe Shane went and made that trade and signed Brian Burns to that big extension is because of how crucial this is for this team's overall health as a defense this year, right? You want that good pass rush to not even make the secondary an issue for the Giants this year, because quarterbacks aren't even going to be able to get it off, right? And they're going to create so much pressure that, they're going to make them want to, make terrible, or they're going to make them make terrible mistakes, I should say. That's at least on paper what Joe Shane wants out of this pass rush. And with, as I mentioned, with Thibodeau's added motivation this year of, okay, yeah, they traded for another guy in this pass rush role that was kind of supposed to be, my thing. I was supposed to mold into that. And he's also a young guy. So we're going to, kind of grow together. But also, I was kind of supposed to be the guy. I think he's going to have an extra edge to him this year. And with Burns, I think it's just a matter of, listen, this Giants team, not a lot of people are projecting them to be great this year. But anything's better than where I just was in Carolina, right? So I think getting a couple more wins on the board is going to be motivation enough for him. Not to mention the big contract, which should motivate everybody, and the capital that they gave up, and especially the second round pick that they gave up. And, they wanted to draft some corners there in the second round, and they didn't end up getting them because they gave up the pick for Brian Burns. So yeah, I'm going the over here. I don't know by how much over, but I do think it's going to be above 23.5.
Nice. I think I got the over too, because I look at the way Bowen could potentially use them and his experience with outside linebackers, / edge rushers, and his coaching tree, his influences. I think he'll find ways to get the most out of these guys. And he's going to have to, like you mentioned the secondary earlier, he's going to have to, because, you don't want these guys covering 4 or 5 seconds, because I think they can get beat a little bit as they start learning their way around the league and getting experience. So, I see them. I wouldn't be surprised if they add some additional pressure. I mean, heck, I'd be curious to see them line up on the same side and tell a tackle and a tight end, all right, good luck trying to block these two on one side. Like, no, I can see little things like little wrinkles like that being used, and I think that maybe one goes to a joker. Who knows? But I think you can see those, and I think they go over, and I think they'll both. One, if not both, will be mentioned in the Pro Bowl discussion, and probably Burns is a All Pro. I think that is going to happen as well too. Now, the last question may lead into my final question of the podcast, but the last over-under one right here. Overall win total for the Giants, 7.5, over or under?
I'm going under. Here's why. And I know that everything seemed positive in those first two questions, right? It's like, oh, wait, they have the offensive rookie of the year. They have their edge rushers have 23.5 sacks, the over on that. But I just don't think that the quarterback, which is the most important thing, I just don't think that he's going to get it right enough I think, I'll put it like this. I think Malik Neighbors is going to create his own success this year, right? And I think the defense is going to carry them to respectable levels this year. But I just think that they're still going to win 6 games. And, they outperformed what they should have been last year. I mean, they probably should have won, 3 games last year? And then Tommy DeVito comes in and has that weird miracle run, and they ended up, obviously getting screwed out of Drake May there, right? They really wanted. But again, there's a reason they wanted Drake May, and I think that them having that end of season kind of weird miracle run there with DeVito, it polished what was not really a great product for the Giants last year. Like again, they should have been on record wise, should have had a worse record. So I think 6-11 is obviously the same record that they had last year, but it's, if you're going off of, they should have been 3 and 14, like, then yeah, this is kind of an improvement, I guess, in my brain a little bit. But yeah, I think they go 6-11. Maybe they get a 7th win and Daboll maybe keeps his job because it's like, oh, well, we had growth this year. Look at the line was better, and if we just get that quarterback, then we can then we can separate ourselves from the pack. But I just don't think it happens this season because I'm just not a believer in Daniel Jones.
You know what? That was my next question. I was like, you know what? So you think it's say if they go under and they do go 7-10, you think that's enough to save his job?
I think there's so many different things that have to be at play here, right? The main one for me is Bill Belichick still doing his underdog fantasy show, or is he on the sidelines for the Philadelphia Eagles?
No.
And I think if that big fish is out there, how is Mara going to look at that and say, we can't. No, we're not going to get the winningest or soon to be potentially the winningest head coach in NFL history. We got to roll the dice on Daboll again. Now, do I think that's fair? Not really. I think Daboll is still a good coach. I really do. I think he's been dealt a bad hand here with the Giants. There's still so many remnants, not only of Gettleman, but of the moves that Shane has made and just the injury bad luck that they've had. And I'm not saying all this is on injury, and a lot of this is on Daboll. But I think if you'll start to see glimpses of it with how creative his offense can be this season. To where a lot of Giants fans will be looking at it like, oh man, if we just had the quarterback, if we just had Carson back in the draft next year, if we just had, Drew Aller too is starting to turn some heads as well. If we just had Shedeur Sanders, oh man, that would be fun too. Then we can get this right. Then Daboll, but at 7-10, I think that might be the threshold where 7-10 with. I should say like that 7-10 with a bunch of different improvements, both to the line. If they show growth, if Neighbors proves to be the stud that he is, if the defense, if the secondary especially proves that, hey, we're young, but we were kind of respectable this year, then I think it could save his job. But if it's an ugly 7-10 or a 6-11 like it was last year, if it's just like, you're basically on paper, you should be a 3-14 team, but you just garner some wins and muster some wins out in the end there by sheer miracle, by sheer will. Then, yeah, I think they start to have a conversation not only about Daboll, but about the GM too.
Well, you know what? You mentioned Belichick, and I see him more fitting the Giants in that way. The reason being, he'd get to go home. He get to go back to the team he was with before. He's close enough to New England. He can go, you know what? See, guys, I did this here. And also, I think I look at it, too, Mara would give him more personnel control. Mm-hmm. I think the Eagles will have Roseman. So if you give him that, he gets his own personnel guys. Belichick, you got good pieces on that defense, and he just has to get a quarterback. He has something he really had in New England, which is actually a viable wide receiver and Neighbors. Mm-hmm. I just look at him like, you know what? I kind of want to see him go back to the Giants. And that'd be interesting, at least for us. We know that for sure.
I think too the elements that New England doesn't have. The reason that Drake May's not starting right now is because their offensive line is, quite frankly, Chris, it's one of the worst I've ever seen. The Giants last year, but they might give them a run for their money this year. But they have the left tackle in Thomas. They have now the other pieces at the offensive line too. Like you said, they have the receiver now, and I guarantee you, like you look at even like Jalen Hyatt, Wan'Dale Robinson, those guys would be wide receiver one for the Patriots. So you put Belichick in this situation, I think things could be really good. And especially if you had the quarterback, it would just, and Dak Prescott, who he has a lot of respect for, as he's been very, very much praising of him in the past. So yeah, no, I think it would be make our jobs kind of interesting, but also maybe not in press conferences.
And now Giants fans are hoping. I know they're hoping right now that Daboll's the one turns around so this Belichick talk can stop. But you know what? It's floating. It's going to float around. You have a bad season. It's going to float around. It's get louder and louder. But Ryan, thank you. You completed the first Talk is Cheap podcast. I appreciate it. Thank you very much for coming on here. It was a lot of fun. And remember, everybody, make sure to check out NJ.com/Giants, where Ryan, Daryl, they'll have all the latest news and information, including wrap-ups from the game against the Vikings, and make sure to check everything out. So for Ryan, I'm Chris. Everybody have a good one. See ya.